Welcome back to the Reach Every Student podcast. Last week, we broke down the macro shift that's happening across education, the techlash, where people are saying we need to get away from technology and technology is hurting students. And I want to say this, they're not wrong. They're not wrong. Once a school or a district realizes that we need to protect student cognition, the next question is, well, what do we do about that? How do we actually run this day by day and step by step? In this podcast, I'm releasing my full second keynote that I delivered in Curitiba, Brazil, where I walk through the MasteryFlip framework kind of in the day-to-day, step-by-step fashion. It's kind of like a masterclass where you're going to learn about how to build AI engines, how to deploy analog roots, and how to really make the Mastery Vivas work. I hope you find this useful and engaging. And here's the big announcement for administrative teams. You don't need to overhaul your entire school to make this work. If you're a principal or a curriculum director, administrator of some kind, right? You can sponsor a single pilot teacher for free. So click on the link here in the show notes to make sure that you get a chance to get the one teacher pilot program and get it for free. And if it works, awesome. If it doesn't, well, you're not out anything. And of course, if you've already got a team that's ready to roll with 4 more teachers, you can get the entire course for half off, right? So that's pretty awesome. So let's go step by step to the practical reality of the MasteryFlip keynote address in Curitiba, Brazil. Let's reach every student. Thank you again. And it's just been a joy to be here in Curitiba to chat with you guys about the future of education. And as I promised yesterday, what I want to do is I get a lot more practical with the MasteryFlip methodology so we can make sure that we preserve the hard coding of cognition with our students. Last night I did some more work on preparing for this, and I did some more reading in the Pope's writing about AI, and I think we should start with what he said. I think it was fascinating. This is another quote I pulled from his reading. Technology has the power to heal, connect, educate, and protect our common home. But it also can divide, exclude, and generate new forms of injustice. That's true, isn't it? In the abstract, technology in and of itself is not a solution to humanity's problems, as it is not inherently evil. In practice, however, technology is never neutral because it takes on the characteristics of those who devise, finance, regulate, and use it. And I'm not 100% confident that those who are in Silicon Valley have our best interests at mind. And they are the ones who are devising it, right? Who finance it, and we use it. It's important that we think through how AI is being used. And he used a very interesting metaphor in his encyclical. He said, there's 2 choices that we face as a society with respect to AI. Number one, there's the Babel syndrome. So he takes 2 stories, narratives from the biblical narrative, and he talks about the Babel syndrome. And in the Babel syndrome, I think what's intriguing is the Tower of Babel. You may know the story. Pride ruled, exclusion, inequality, and conflict. And he fears that that is where AI is headed. But he said there's another path, and he then brings another biblical narrative, and that is the story of Nehemiah. And if you know the story, Nehemiah was a slave in Babylon, and he went to the king of Babylon, and he said, I want to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild it. And so he went back to rebuild it, but he built up a place where human dignity mattered, right? Where there was common good, and it was a collaborative spirit. And he really, I think it's a very powerful metaphor as we think about AI in education. I think AI in general, but in our world, we're talking about AI in education. You see, to review yesterday, if you weren't here, there is a synaptic cost to AI in education, right? We have a choice. If AI is misused, then students will not form the appropriate synaptic connections in their brain, and they will be stupefied. They will lose critical thinking skills, and they will not have the cognition that they need going forward. I saw that in my classrooms, and I said, what is happening? And now research is bearing out that this is indeed happening. It's so important. And I think about what you guys do in the health professions. And in the health professions, it is so important that you want your students, your future doctors, your future nurses, your future physiotherapists, you want them to make mistakes, if you will, at the bench.
and not at the bedside. Because if they make the mistake at the bedside, then real harm is going to happen to people, right? And so what you do in your world really, really matters. And we want to make sure that, maybe I'm being selfish, I'm getting old, as somebody pointed out yesterday. I'm getting old and I need doctors more, right? You know you're getting old when you have a doctor for different parts of your body, right? I've got doctors for all kinds of parts of my body. And I think something fascinating too, just before I dive into the nuts and bolts of how to do the MasteryFlip, how many of you are familiar with Sal Khan? You've heard this name, Sal Khan, Khan Academy. So this guy developed the Khan Academy, became world famous in doing a lot of very interesting things. I actually had lunch or breakfast, I guess it was, with Sal Khan many years ago. And in 2023, he said this. He says, we're at the cusp of using AI for probably the biggest positive transformation that education has ever seen. The way we're going to do that is by giving every student on the planet an artificially intelligent but amazing personal tutor. 3 years ago, he said that. A few months ago, he changed his tune. He said, for a lot of students, it was a non-event. He built the tutor. It's called Khanmigo. Go to khanacademy.com or whatever. He built the tutor. And guess what? He says, imagine, and this is Mr. Khan saying this, imagine he, the tutor, walked into a class, sat in the back of the room, and waited for students to seek out help. Some will, most won't. That's been the experience with AI tutoring. It doesn't necessarily make students motivated to learn or fill in gaps in knowledge. It's been a non-event. So he backtracked. He said, I built this great AI tutor and nobody used it. Don't you see the problem? And here's the John Bergman quote on it. AI tools are like treadmills. All right, how many of you have bought a treadmill, right? They work perfectly in theory, but without a human trainer pushing you and holding you accountable, that treadmill becomes a place to hang your laundry. So, and then Khan, I couldn't find the exact quote, but I read it somewhere. He said, what is necessary to make education good is a good teacher, not a good AI, a good teacher. He said something to the effect that if I could choose between really, really good AI or a really good teacher, I'd take the teacher every time, right? So we who are in the education world, whether we're teaching, in my case, year 11 and year 12 students, or in your case, graduate students at a medical school or whatever it might be, they need us. We are the ones who communicate this. And we got to remember, learning is messy. Learning happens through productive struggle, through friction. We cannot reduce the friction. If we reduce the friction, then learning won't happen. The metaphor I used yesterday, if you recall, it's like taking ChatGPT, like taking a forklift to the weight room is when you take ChatGPT and have it do the work for you. That is not going to be useful for us all. So let me take you into room 229. That is my room at Houston Christian High School, and I want to walk you through how we can do the MasteryFlip. So what are some ways that I have implemented this? Now, recall, in the MasteryFlip, there are 3 key paradigms, or pillars maybe. AI engines, analog roots, and human checks. And I want to walk that through step by step we're going to expand on each of these, AI checks, or AI engines, analog roots, and human checks, and talk about how that might look, how it looks in my class, and maybe how it might look in your context, which will be different than mine. All right, AI engines. What I think we need is a new learning operating system. We do need the tech. It is naive to think that AI is going to go away, because it's not. And AI is here to stay. So how can we utilize AI in a positive way to make this happen? When I was in San Francisco just in February, and I was in front of an audience of some of the tech folks, and I proposed that we need a new operating system for education with respect to AI. Because remember, AI is not built for the classroom. It's built for the boardroom and for business and for efficiency. Education is not efficient, and it shouldn't be. So here's what I wish we had. This is my wish list, and the good news is a couple of the things on my wish list have come true in the last few months. So that's pretty awesome. So remember, this is going to be a flip situation where you're in the pre-learning stage. What we need to do, this is the thing we can send home to our students, is we can send home, if you will, the easy stuff, the information transfer, and then when they come to your classroom, you spend the bulk of your time in the middle of Bloom's taxonomy, applying and analyzing and probably evaluating in your context. All right? And so what I envision is this learning operating system that has some fundamental rules established. So I call it the stage one. So this is in the AI engines. This is what I dream of Silicon Valley building or whatever. Is there a Silicon Valley in Brazil? Somebody needs to build this. I think there'd be a market for this big time. So the first thing I want is the AI should have what I call wrappers. There needs to be like a set of, I don't know if that's the right term, I'm not a technical person in that sense, but there needs to be something over the top of AI that gives it rules and regulations so that it preserves productive struggle and makes sure it follows the best pedagogical practices that make sense. When you design software, you can design software in a way that helps the end user to use it in a good way. You can also design software in a way that causes the user to use it in a way that's not useful, right? If you look at most of your social media platforms, they hire addiction coaches, addiction experts, so that they can figure out how to make their product more addictive. Well, why couldn't we hire the same type of a person to make it more educationally, pedagogically sound? So one thing I would want them to do in the backdrop is I want it to be trained to each style of a teacher. Now, I don't know if this is true in medicine, but see, I taught chemistry for many years. And when in the world of chemistry, there's two ways that many teachers will teach chemistry from the perspective of the mathematical portion of it. Some will use a method called dimensional analysis or unit cancellation, and another group will use more of a formulaic formula method. Now, neither of them is right or wrong, but I believe in the dimensional analysis method. That's the way I taught for many, many years. But if AI all of a sudden went to the formulaic method, it would confuse my students. So I would want me to hard code the AI to say, you will always teach this in the dimensional analysis approach of chemistry, or whatever it might be. I don't know what would be an equivalent. And if you're a brand new teacher, maybe you don't even know the difference between dimensional analysis and the formulaic method, and you could say, I want to follow the master teacher, Jose, or somebody. So you could say, which teacher do you want to model this after? So you could hard code what are the best teachers. So number one, I think what we need is a tuned coach. Number two is I also want it to follow longitudinal mastery. That means that the data follows the student. Now, I work with year 9s to the year 12s at our school, and I'd love to see that data track them from year to year to year. We could see the growth. And AI is very, very good at looking at data and summarizing data. It's very, very good at these things. And I think what we need to do is we need to have this longitudinal matters from year to year, from class to class, and we can see the mastery. So I think that's something that needs to be hard-coded. And the absolute most important one is that we need to engineer it for productive struggle. It can't give the answer. It needs to say, oh, you're struggling. Oh, let me help you. They don't just give the answer. You know that. You're a teacher. And as a teacher, a professor, a student comes to you and is struggling with something. Do you just say, oh, here's the answer? No teacher's ever done that. They sit and they say, all right, let me work this through. Okay, have you thought about this? Well, what about that? Right? And that's what the AI can do, but it's got to be trained to do this, because if you say, help me on this answer, it just gives you the answer now. And we need to have some kind of an AI system for kids, for students, for graduate students, it doesn't matter, that follows these rules. So that's the first three parts of the wrapper. For the second part of the wrapper, okay, that's like the hard coding of it. Here's the things I wish it had, okay? The first one I call a content wrapper. In a content wrapper, so remember, in the flipped environment, the student at the home is going to watch a short video, do a reading or something to this effect. And when they do this, what I want them is to have some more interaction. So I want it so that if it's watching a video, they can pause the video and ask the video a question. Now, if you go to my YouTube channel, and you'll see lots of videos featuring John teaching chemistry and teaching physics and teaching geology, but they can't push pause and ask me a question. But there could be a way, right, for AI to do that. All right? And if they don't understand the video, even better, I would love it if the video would all of a sudden pause it. This is one of the hard parts, and say, John, now I'm John the student, hey John, what do you think about this? How would you answer this? So it knows what the hard parts are, and then it gets some feedback, and then I, as the teacher on the back end, get a report that says, these students are struggling with this. Or this particular student is struggling with this. Or as a class, they're struggling with this particular concept. And now I can pick up the pieces when they come into the class. So that's what I call the content wrapper. And here's some things I wanted. Like I've already given up these. AI identifies the hard parts. AI asks a tailored question of the student. AI engages in a Socratic struggle, so hard build into this, the Socratic method. I see a heat map of mastery, and it prepares students for the Mastery Viva. Remember, that's the third part of our thing. And then the group space. And I alluded to this yesterday. I think there's a place for what I'm going to call the unstuck wrapper. Now, in the middle stage of my methodology, it's the analog roots where they're working usually with paper, pencil, books, devices are put away, but there's a time when they're stuck. Now, if you have a small class of 20 students, you probably can help every student. But if you have, I imagine many of you have classes of 50 and 60 and 100 or 200, you cannot get to every student. So what if they could prove that they have done some work? They bring it to the machine and they show that they've done some work, and now it unlocks their help. So I call this the unstuck wrapper, right? They bring paper, notice they got a little paper, and then they bring it to the unstuck wrapper. The unstuck wrapper gives them hints. It doesn't give them the answer. It says it takes that role of the teacher who's trying to help them well on how to do it. And then built into that, the next part is, I think, a translator wrapper. So, I teach physics, so I have a physics example here. If a student is struggling with inertia, what if it says it knows that this kid is into skateboarding, and it gives them a skateboarding metaphor? Or it asks them about, it goes back to music because they're a musician. So it knows what the kid is into. I got a letter just a few days ago from one of my students. I was writing her letter of recommendation for college, and Camilla, she was there, and she said something in her letter that just made a lot of sense. You know what I loved about what you did, Mr. Bergman, is that when you came around to help me, you always put it in the context of piloting. So she is a young lady who's already gotten her pilot's license, which is pretty cool, by the way. And so I'd said, well, how would this apply? Well, I just tried to, because I knew that was her thing, piloting. And luckily, I know a fair amount about piloting because my father was a pilot. But if she was a skateboarder, I would not be able to bring the right metaphor to the table, or because I don't know much about skateboarding. So I might attempt at it, but the AI can be very good because it knows a lot of things about a lot of things, right? So that is if you will, what I wish AI could do. Good news, a couple of those things I've just talked about exist, and I'll share video clips of those in a few minutes. So we looked at this, the day in the life. So at home, the step one, they're going to interact through AI tools. Maybe not. By the way, you don't have to use any AI tools to do the MasteryFlip model. But I think that that's where we're headed, and someday these tools will be robust and well done. And then we move to the in-class, they're getting unstuck, like we talked about a minute ago. And then we have the Mastery Viva. And so those are then that's where they have a human check, or I am going to have an interview with them, et cetera, et cetera. So you might say this doesn't exist. How do we do it tomorrow? So I want to now show you some tools and some techniques that I've found to be very helpful for me, and ones that are on the cusp of being released. Some of these tools don't completely exist, but they are just about there. So I'm going to share with this tool. So this is a tool that my school has bought called FlintK12.com. There are equivalent higher education tools like this, but I just want to describe what it does. So it's an AI tool that our school purchased. I don't know what it costs, whatever, some kind of a tool. And so what I had students do is I really value that students ask questions. All right, so at the beginning of class, the students have watched a video, no AI at all, just watched a video, taken notes, and they come to class and I want them to all ask a question, but all of them to ask a question. Now, if I said, hey, who has a question? I may get 3 or 4 to raise their hand, but they fire up their laptops, okay, and then they ask a question. Now, I have fed this tool, I've trained it. I fed this tool the textbook section of that from whence the video was made. They watched a video on a particular topic. I think this one had to do with streams, stream erosion channels. So I said, have my students ask you a question, and then I want you to answer the question. But then I want you to follow up and ask them an extension question and make this last 5 or 6 minutes. So it's just a quick 5 or 6 minute opening activity my students do in class. At the end, I have this screen. I've grayed out their names. We've got J, J, C, J, L, R, whatever. So you can see the students. And it automatically, I watch this happen in live, by the way. I can see this populating on my screen while they're typing in. And so one student, J number 1, if you will, wanted to understand the Earth's connected ocean system. And I can click in and find exactly what their questions are. Or HMS Challenger ocean exploration, that was part of the video topic. Someone wanted to know about the Titanic depth and the depth of ocean exploration challenges. And you can see how many minutes, this all happened on February 5th of this year, and they spent between 4 and 6 minutes. Now let's dive into one of those. And so here is, actually, this is Camilla, my pilot I just mentioned. And so if you look at the top, that's her question. Does the temperature at the bottom of the ocean ever change since it's so far from the sunlight? Oh, this must be an ocean question. And is it hot or cold? And then AI gives an answer. Nice, right? She reads it, next screen. And then it asks her 3 questions, and she gets to pick one. Why do you think cold water sinks while warm water stays at the surface? What property of water causes this? Etc. And then she answers question number 1. She writes number 1. Maybe it's because of the density of the water based on, etc., etc. And then I get all of this data back from the AI. So this is a very powerful tool. And again, I actually said to the AI, I actually want you to give him the answer the first time, but not the second time. But I could have just as easily said, don't give them the answer, walk them through the questions. I wanted to foster curiosity with my students. So that's the tool called flintk12.com. And for your information, there are tools very similar to this. As I did research, I've not actually used these tools, but I Googled it and I said, what tools are like Flint K-12? Describe them to me. And as far as I can tell, these are the ones that are very popular in higher education that are very similar to that tool. So I work in a different context. And these are, I think, the kinds of things institutions purchase or buy subscriptions to, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a very interesting tool. Oops, oh, I want to wait for that. All right. Now here is the creepiest tool of them all. So there's a company, and actually, interestingly enough, when I was speaking in San Francisco, in the audience is the CEO of this company.
For example?
Oh, don't play it yet. Hold on. Is the CEO of this company, and all right, back up. All right, there we go. I uploaded my video on thermal energy to their platform. Okay. Also, actually, before that, I stood in front of my webcam and I talked. I read a script. It then pulled the text from my video, and then it made, and even though it was my voice, it made an AI avatar of John teaching the same lesson in AI voice. In the middle of this video, it's going to interrupt and ask the student a question. And by this way, the student was me, so it's kind of weird, okay? And then it continues on. So that in the upper, well, when you look at it, the upper right-hand corner is not me, it's the AI me. So it's a weird, creepy thing. And yeah, let's just watch.
For example, if it's chilly outside, the car's heater can actually use the engine's excess heat to warm up the inside of your vehicle. So thermal energy shows up in every kind of energy transformation. John, let me ask you, how do you think thermal energy shows up in everyday life besides just in car engines? Where else do you notice heat as a byproduct or something we can use?
I think I see it when I am
working out because I get super hot when I exercise.
That's a great example, John. When you exercise, your muscles are using chemical energy, and some of it gets converted into movement. But a lot of it also becomes heat. That's why you feel warmer, start sweating, and your heart rate goes up to help cool you down. The surface actually gets warmer right where they touch. So even in simple activities like sliding something across a desk, or even rubbing your hands together, you're witnessing thermal energy being created from friction. It's a neat reminder that energy is never lost, just transformed into another form, often as heat.
So I'm a
John,
baseball
after
player, and as a baseball player, sometimes I slide into second base. Is there thermal energy involved in that process?
Absolutely, John. When you slide into second base, there's a lot of friction between your uniform and the dirt or base, and that friction turns some of your kinetic energy, your movement, into heat. You probably notice your clothes or even your skin feeling warm or even burning a bit right after the slide. That warmth is thermal energy generated from friction, just like the block sliding across the table.
I think you get the idea. Isn't that kind of weird and creepy? So I was playing the role of the student and the teacher at the same time, so that's weird. And I started using this with my students, and it was running about 50-50. 50% loved it, and 50% thought it was weird. So, and you don't have to have the AI John in the corner. You can just have AI voice, random AI voice. But one thing we found in the world of flipped learning is it's always better if it's you who's doing the teaching. But now it's kind of weird because they can say, well, I had a conversation with you last night at home, Mr. Bergman, and it was... They did try, by the way, to ask, somewhat inappropriate questions as the average teenager would. And at least it didn't have me saying really weird things. So, I mean, they did ask me, like, Mr. Bergman, who's the GOAT of basketball, the greatest of all time? And I correctly answered that it was Michael Jordan, at least the AI John. So you might disagree. Most of my students think it's LeBron James, and they're frankly wrong. So, another tool that I've used that I'm a fan of is Perusall. I don't know, has anybody ever used Perusall? It's primarily a higher education tool. It was developed by a friend of mine at Harvard University. He's a Harvard physics professor, and he worked with his friend, the Harvard AI professor. So this is kind of pretty smart people. And it is a AI sort of reading tool. So you upload text, okay? So here I uploaded text. Actually, I just had my students purchase their textbook through them, and I could assign reading in the actual textbook. And if you look on the screen, they have highlighted different portions of the reading, and they've made comments on those readings. Does that make sense? So it is a social, and then they can see each other's comments. So it's a social reading platform. One thing Dr. Eric Mazur from Harvard, he said is, I wanted to make the independent space of the flipped learning thing social, because he believes that, I think we all know this, learning happens best in a social environment. And so if we can make learning social, even the independent reading social, they can interact. And so somebody can write a question and then another student can respond. But there's AI behind this. So what's really cool is, what do you see as the teacher when you're done? You get a confusion report. So it analyzes all of the student comments, and then it says, there's confusion about distinguish between physical and chemical changes, particularly regarding energy changes. This is from my own classes. And then they give me example comments that the students made. And then there's a second one that's at the bottom of the screen, and a third one. And so what it tells you, what are your students confused about based upon what they were reading. Now, this was from a textbook, but I've also used this where I just have a PDF and I upload it. And they can read the PDF, and I can assign. I've even used, in one case, I used an online open source textbook, and I uploaded that, and I can just assign a section of it, not just the entire book. I can just say, just chapter 4, section 3, or something like that. There's a place where students can take notes. It's a very powerful tool. It even allows you to upload videos, and you can have quizzes built into them. They keep adopting it, or adapting it, and iterating it, and it's probably about 5 or 6 years old. And so it's become quite an interesting tool, and it is literally free. The way it finances itself is that if you assign a textbook, you have them buy the textbook through the platform, and it's the same price that they would pay for an online textbook for any typical textbook. So that's a fascinating tool. It's called Perusall, Perusall.com. Oh, 10 years. Wow. So older than I thought. Okay. It's been around for quite a while. It's a very fascinating tool. So let's get back to now that was the independent space, right? That was the AI engines. That's the pre-work stage, things that you can do to help you with students. But what about the analog roots? What does that look like? What happens in the class? And here's a picture of my class from a couple of weeks ago. Notice what's not there? No laptops, no devices, and they are interacting with things, right? They've got pieces of paper. It was a ecosystems thing, and they were putting them into charts, and so it's much more that. Or here's in Harvard Medical School, I want to go back to this in terms of the analog roots. Remember that I had a chance to visit Dr. Schwartzstein's class, the case-based collaborative study guy, and he said something interesting about AI that I thought was fascinating. He said this: AI creates an artificially clean world that de-skills future doctors. True clinical reasoning is an inductive muscle that can only be wired through raw analog friction. So we need to get that friction, and what I'm trying to do in my analog roots in my class is I'm trying to get friction built in. I want to slow the learning process down so they have time to think, so they have time to process, so that they actually use those cognitive muscles that will help them to grow and to become critical thinkers and experts someday at some field, right? But here's my analog roots. When they're done, this is what it looks like. It's papers. And I check their work and I sign it with my little JB. You see a couple of JBs on this paper. So it's a paper, it's a notebook. It's just old school. I hand out little packets. There's like 25 pages for Unit 5 and then 25 pages for Unit 6. And they kind of build a little paper notebook. That's how it's done. Here is me working with some students. Here I'm working with Jay. Here I'm working with Lila and Ellie, yeah. So it's just walking around my class. I had the best job in the world. I get to walk around and interact with students. I don't stand up like I'm doing now. That is kind of weird. The guy who invented flip learning is doing a lecture about flip learning. Have you thought about that? It's kind of weird. So that's what analog roots look like. It's really quite simple. Walk around and have them do stuff. I don't know what the stuff is in medical education. I mean, sometimes I imagine it's cutting in a cadaver, or sometimes it's discussing what's the diagnosis of a patient. I don't know. I'm not a medical person in any way, sense or way. Now, I think the most fascinating thing, though, that has been the best thing that we've done is we've moved to these Mastery Vivas. So this is the oral exam, if you will. So when we think about the oral exam, what do they look like? I want my students to think deeply. And so I have two different kinds of oral assessments. The first one is the formative, and the second one is the summative. Now, formative is a short, 3-minute, concentrated conversation with a student once they have at least thought they have mastered. So you saw that paper. They would do the paper, and then they would finish the lesson, and they would say, Mr. Bergman, I'm ready for my mastery check, okay? Or Mastery Vivas, the cooler word. I want to show you a video clip. Now, in this first video clip, you're going to see it's the same exact day, the same exact class, and the first young lady I'm going to talk to struggled with the concept. And so I want you to pay attention to her. She's a redheaded girl. And then the next is a young man who gets it pretty quickly. And then notice what I do is that I ask another question of him that's an extension. So let's watch these two kids. Why does the alluvium cover the valley floor? What is alluvium? Explain alluvium to me.
It's I forgot.
Okay.
I just know that it's like where the water is like set itself on the land. It's not, yeah, because the flood water slows down and deposits the sediment during the repeated flood.
Well, what does the word alluvium mean? It's a super, don't overthink it. It's a simple word.
Flat.
No.
Alluvial.
It makes an alluvial fan, but we actually think we learned it in
Here. Alluvial. It's the meandering, the braided, like, it's a thing that just like flows.
No, alluvium is sediments. It's another word for sediments.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's just another word for sediments. So let's go back and look at this. Why does alluvium cover the valley floor in a floodplain? So we're in a flood. Harvey happens. What?
There was a regional flood.
Okay, good. So why does sediment, alluvium, cover the floor?
Because the flood waters of the flood like slow down and then deposits the sediment from everything. So it just repeats the floods. So it just continues to happen.
Remember, a river doesn't just carry water.
It covers, it carries sediments too.
Erosion happens, the sediment, deposition keeps happening, the sediment moves over and it goes to the floor plane. Like when deposition happens, it goes to the floodplain first.
You're almost there. When does it go in the floodplain? When does the sediment, alluvium, go into the floodplain?
When it keeps flooding. So when it keeps flooding and then when it just keeps going on.
What do you think? Now, this isn't on here, but what do you think is a benefit of alluvium in a floodplain?
The moving of sediment. So like deposition, and then that sediment can like maybe help the ground. Maybe like
How so?
help the area around it, maybe for the fools.
That's exactly right.
Oh, this one.
So I don't know if you picked up on that, and maybe that's hard to translate. I don't know, those who are hearing this in Portuguese. But Bethany, the first student, she struggled. And my goal was basically to get her to sort of a certain level of understanding. And then when I was with Dimitri, I asked that extension question. And, we were talking about floods and how water, when in a river floods, it also brings sediment, and the fancy word is alluvium, which she struggled with. And once she got that concept, she did okay with it. But I was able to extend that and say, when we think about floods, we think bad things. And these students especially, I don't know if you know your history of Houston, but in 2017, there was a huge hurricane and it flooded most of Houston. They had 50 inches of rain. I don't know how much that is in centimeters. It's a lot. Is that 70, 80 centimeters of rain, something terrible. And most of these students' homes were flooded. And so they were 7 years old in boats leaving their homes. So they understand floods and they think it's terrible. But of course, one of the benefits, which Dimitri figured out, was a flood also fertilizes the land when it floods, doesn't it? Because it puts all this sediments, rich soil on the outside. And he was able to take that and make that extension. It was just beautiful, right? Yeah. And this next one is my physics class, and the audio is bad, but I do have subtext. So hopefully this will play. In this case, it's not them working on a piece of paper. They are now actually have a little working circuit, a circuit board that they had to make work. And for them to get credit, they had to explain to me how the electrons flowed through the wire to make the light bulb turn on. So explain.
Okay, so trace the electron. Positive will make negative. One electrons go through, a series of arc into this wire, which goes to the solder, well, to ions to find hole in the electrons to just like flow through there.
How do the electrons flow through? Because the electrons have to then travel from this green wire to this green wire. What's going on?
Because it's salsa. So then that allows electrons to flow over.
I don't think that's right, though. Now remember back to chemistry class, we
Water. What happened? I think that's. So maybe the audio was bad, but I am now doing this 2 or 3 minute check where they have to explain how the circuit worked. And I don't know if you noticed, but I've got right in my hand there, I've got a clipboard, and I'm just checking off if they could explain it to my satisfaction. And so it doesn't have to look like the first picture. It could also look like the second picture where they're actually physically doing something. And this could easily, in your context, be, they're opening up a heart on a cadaver or something. I don't know what it might look like in your context. And so for my formative assessment, so I actually have here's kind of how that class actually works. I've actually switched. I had those questions in February. I was using the AI tool, and then I decided to actually ban the laptops. And so I've said, I want them to ask the questions. So at the beginning of class, I'd go over the content from the previous night's video just very quickly, 3 minutes, 4 minutes max. And then I would walk around the room. They would then have their analog roots to work on. And then I would walk around and say, what's your interesting question? So if you look at the paper, it might be hard to see, but at the bottom, it says video summary and question to ask in class. So as they watch the video, this is a student's actual video notes. So she took video notes, I think it's a she took video notes, and then she wrote down a question. And then I came around and I said, what's your interesting question? And then we had a dialogue back and forth about what her interesting question was. And then you can see the JB, I signed it, says, boom, you're good, and I mark it up in my book. And then when they're done with the analog roots, they've done, in this case, maybe the paperwork. This is the same student. She then answered the 5 questions or whatever it is. And then I had a second Mastery Viva conversation with her, or with, sometimes this is like a group conversation because I have larger classes sometimes and I have to figure out how to make it work. And I say, boom, explain number 4 to me.
because that's like the key question. Or maybe another student's going to ask question number 3. Whatever it might be, I want them to verbally defend their answer. And one thing I'm going to be doing next year as a note is I'm going to actually have 2 levels. You get on a 4-point scale, I'm expecting a 3. If you can't get a 3, I'm not going to give you a grade. But a 3 is you've adequately answered it. That would be Bethany, the redheaded girl earlier. And you get a 4 if you can extend it. And that's my plan next year. So that is a formative assessment, okay? Now, what about a summative assessment, a large scale one? Now, again, note my context. I don't teach where you guys do, but I wanted to do something really big. And so I did what I called the Trebuchet project. Now, a trebuchet, I mentioned it briefly yesterday. A trebuchet is an ancient siege engine. And my students were tasked to build these things, launch them across the school field, and then explain the physics behind them. So let's watch the trebuchets in this next video clip. Yeah. All right. That's the deal there, right? Now, this young lady, if you might notice, it's supposed to shoot off in this direction, and I don't know if you caught it, but it went backwards. And then look at her face, like, oh, really? So there was failure to be had. And this is Sam from yesterday. Remember Sam? This is that Sam. And this is slow-mo. And his sort of worked. It didn't really shoot perfectly. If you watch the ball in slow motion, it kind of angles down. So it was okay. And he got better at that. But yeah, so you can see across the school field, that's what they did. Then they wrote a report where they explained the physics behind it. They did like video analysis of each of their launches, et cetera, et cetera. But then I said, now you have to defend it. Each of you individually, no group. They were in groups of 2, by the way, to make these. And then they had to defend it. And let's watch these clips. I've got 2 students. I've got Vaughn first, and then I've got Jade second. Vaughn, as you'll see, crushes it. And Jade struggles, but she gets there. So this is just excerpts of about 10 minutes I spent with each student.
Well, yeah, so like when you have your arm here at its rest point, you have your counterweight, then the sling, and ball there.
Mm-hmm.
So
Draw the pivot point too, just for fun.
pivot right here.
Okay, good. All right.
So when it's here before it goes, when it releases, this force of gravity pulls this down. So when it pulls but here, the tennis ball, this applies a torque here. The tennis ball also applies a torque, but this torque is much, much, much greater because the counterweight's much heavier than the tennis ball. So the net torque is on this side, causes the actual arm to rotate clockwise. And so the torque causes the angular acceleration, which then begins to speed up the arm. It uses some of the potential energy, goes into actually making the arm move and overcoming its resistance to motion and moment of inertia. And so then when the arm begins to spin, it begins to speed up. And since...
What direction is it accelerating when it's flying through the air?
Forward? Like this way?
Accelerating.
Oh, accelerating? Well, ours went like a high, up, higher.
So what's the acceleration if it went high and then low?
Negative acceleration.
And it's only in what direction?
Down.
Down. Is there any acceleration in the X direction?
No, it's always 0. 0.
So she needed some prompting, right? So these were parts of these 10-minute conversations that I had with the students where they had to defend their understanding of the working of a trebuchet. Now, again, in your context, I can imagine you can think of what would be the deep questions that you could ask of your students. And my guess is you're thinking, great, I've got 150 students. How do I do that with lots and lots of students? So there is a tool that I have just been introduced to in the last 3 or 4 months. Afrin, she is a neuroscientist in Dallas, and she approached me and she's seen some of my work, and she said, I want to build an AI tool that preserves the productive struggle and will be a great oral testing tool. And she just sent me this video of how it works. I've played around with it, and it's pretty cool. So let's watch. Actually, I'm gonna skip to it. This is the tool that she's going to demonstrate it. Watch her do this. It's a K-12 edition, and they're working on a higher ed edition as we speak. So let's take a look.
Hi, Efferin. Hope you're doing well today. Nice, let's dive in. Why do plant cells have a cell wall while animal cells do not?
Plant cells have a cell wall to protect them against environmental conditions.
You identified the protective function of the cell wall. What specific environmental challenges do you think plant cells face that make this protection necessary?
High wind speed, moisture, or extreme heat are some examples of environmental conditions that plants can be exposed to.
You mentioned environmental conditions plants face. You correctly identified some factors, but you need to connect these to how the cell wall protects plants and why that protection is vital for their survival. Now, let's move to the next question. What is the function of the cell membrane in a cell?
I think I forgot.
That's okay. Can you think of why it might be important for a cell to control what goes in and out?
So it can regulate its environment?
You correctly noted that the cell membrane regulates its environment. However, you didn't mention its porosity or how it allows substances to move in and out, which are key aspects of its function. Goodbye.
Once the assignment is submitted by the student, the instructor gets visibility into an overview of the student's performance. They can also view the performance score of the student against each of the predefined rubric criteria. For a detailed analysis on each of the questions, the instructors can check out the questions tab. As you can see here, on the first question, the student first got a score of 2, but after a follow-up, their score went up to a 3 or proficient level. This is data from one student. With Articulate AI, instructors get visibility into an entire class at a scale that was never possible before.
So this is her tool that she's developing. I don't know how to music. Cool. Articulate AI, and they're working for a K-12 or a higher ed edition. I think it's very fascinating. So she prescribed, as the teacher, there were these specific 2 questions that she wanted it to ask. She had a very specific rubric that she designed, and then it's going to just really quickly, a quick oral check of work. Now, I'm not comfortable that this is always going to be done by, I don't want AI to do all these oral checks. I want me as the teacher to do this. But there is a reality that you may not be able to get to every student. And so one thing I'm going to do next year is, I think on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'll meet with one group of students, and then this Tuesdays and Thursdays or something like that, I will have and then on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I will meet physically, but then on Tuesdays and Thursdays or something like that, I'll have them be checked by the AI, so that I could get to more students, you see, or some kind of a rotational system. Some people may want to do this like with random. I'm going to randomly pick 5 students today out of the hat, and who knows who's going to have me as for the live conversation. So there's ways to have AI help you with this, and I think that this is a very powerful thing that we can use. So a fascinating type of a tool. And then let's bring back in Dr. Grotzer from Harvard, and this was part of my conversation with her. Oral test, I don't know, but it's not like,
Yeah.
and they have that, you can't fake that. I mean,
No.
the AI can help you learn how to prepare for it, but when all is said and done, you've got to talk
Right.
to me.
Right. Well, and think about how you're preparing them for the world of work. So, if you go into your job and you're working, in a place that creates circuits or whatever, you have to be able to talk to others about it. You can't say, oh, let me go ask ChatGPT because I don't remember it. And I don't, I'm not holding any mental models of what this is. So, that's really powerful. And those are authentic problems. They're problems that matter in the world that will shift and change how they think about these big, complex systems.
So we're in a world where I think one of the coins of this new realm is, can you defend yourself orally? Because if you say on paper, it's too easy to, as we say, push the easy button. So, but you might say, I have 150 students in a room like this. How do I do it? Here's some thoughts. What I think you could do is this. We could scale the human check if we're in a room like this. I think number 1, you'd get 4 student groups of 4, and maybe whatever, some number. And then the members would examine each other, right? grill each other on the topic, and then the professor randomly picks 6 students, if that's all the time you got, and then you grill those students, but they don't know which students it's going to be. And I would encourage you to record, bring your cell phone or something like that and record that, and even let AI kind of help you analyze it as a backup. And they know that that's going to happen, that they're going to get 5 students who are going to get picked, or 20. I don't know. You don't have to figure that out if you've got 150 students. So I think this could be another way. I'm not sure how this is going to look in your context, but I think the value of it really, really makes a difference. And as I conclude, I want to bring a medical thing. It's dangerous for, a high school science teacher to talk to a bunch of doctors and now talk about medicine. But I've been fascinated with this story for some time. I was alerted to it some years ago. And I don't know if you know this. I imagine you know this story way better than I do. But in the late 1800s, 2 I don't know if it's movements or 2 technologies in the world of medicine happened: anesthesia and antiseptics. With anesthesia, I don't know if you know the story, it's a fascinating story, but there was a dentist in Boston, and he was working with a surgeon in Boston, and he was starting to say, I want to have patients have less pain during surgery. And imagine the world before anesthesia. Surgery, as I did the reading and the research, people's job was to hold people down, because they're cutting into them and they're holding them down as they're writhing on the table. And the mark of a good surgeon was that he or she was fast, because you were hurting literally writhing in pain. It was, bloody and stuff. I don't like blood. So yeah, it was. And then this dentist in Boston with the surgeon in Boston, they wrote a paper, they learned how to use ether, they put some patients to sleep, and it was calm, it was quiet. They shared it. And in 3 months, it had gone all over the world and everybody was using anesthesia. It went to Sao Paulo, and it went to London, and it went to Hong Kong, and everywhere in the world, surgeons heard about this, and it was immediate adoption. And why did it happen immediately? Because it made the job of the surgeon easier, and they saw immediate results, right? Simultaneously, you've got this guy named Joseph Lister who's saying, you know what, we ought to actually clean our instruments between surgeons. In fact, the reading I did said that surgeons in that day and age, they loved to wear their bloody smock, and they would have their same instruments. So they go from patient to patient to patient. So the same instruments, the same scalpel that they used on patient number 1 and number 2 and number 3 was the same. And it was a badge of honor to have that dirty, bloody smock. And then Joseph Lister came along and he showed research, very extensive research, that says if we clean our instruments and we sterilize them, and if we, had carboxylic acid and all these things, and the patient safety went significantly up, and the death rate went way down. And it was just like, you'd think this is just as amazing. And it was, by the way, as anesthesia. But the surgeons did not see immediate gains. It was a hassle to change your clothes, to wash your hands, to sterilize your instruments, right? And they didn't see immediate results. The patient didn't die on the table. They died 3 weeks later from sepsis, right? So, no immediate change, and it was harder on them. And you know how long it took before antiseptics happened as common practice in medicine? It was 30 years later. 30 years versus 3 months. A tragedy. Think of the people whose lives were lost or their lives were significantly impacted. And why do I tell that story? Because in our world of AI, or let's say it this way, in education, it is not a fast-changing institution. We do not see immediately the results of what we're doing, right? We give a treatment, if you will, a treatment to our students. We don't know if it's going to turn out all right. We don't see the results immediately, and to make change is hard. It's always hard, but if it makes your life really easy, you're going to do it, right? Anesthesia. But if it makes your life harder, you have to wash your hands, you've got to clean your instruments, you've got all that stuff. That's a lot more work. We don't get to see that change. I was at church last week. And I was at church, and I'm just standing out at the end of church, and a young lady comes up to me. And I vaguely remember her. And she comes up to me and she says, "You were my teacher 6 years ago." I said, "Yeah." And she said, I start pharmacy school next week or next term, and it's because of you." And I thought, wow, it took 6 years for me to see. I didn't know this 6 years ago, and now she's starting pharmacy school, and I didn't see this result. I didn't know that the treatment I was giving to her 6 years ago was going to have this impact on this young lady, but now I get to see it. So in our world of AI, the problem that we have is we have to change, because if the doctors of the future or the health professionals of the future are walking through medical school or whatever, pharmacology school or whatever it is, by using copy-paste ChatGPT, the results will be terrible. We do not want those junior doctors, those junior pharmacists, whatever that might be, we want them to be very good at what they do. And as I get old, as somebody pointed out yesterday, as I get old, I need more doctors, and I want quality doctors. And so what you do really, really makes a difference. And so we have to protect that productive struggle. I don't know, as Dr. Justin Reich said in one of my interviews, he says, nobody knows how to teach in the world of AI. But the only people who can solve this problem are practicing teachers. And so we've got to try. Now, I think I'll die on this stand, is that I think whatever it is, you preserve productive struggle. Whether you choose the MasteryFlip model with the AI engines and the analog roots and the Mastery Vivas, that's fine. It's working in my classroom, and I'm hearing results from people around the world who are into the MasteryFlip certification, and they're seeing how it can work in their classes. I don't know if that's going to be the method, but I do know that what's happening is the cognition is decreasing when they use AI in a way that hurts them, and we've got to keep that productive struggle. So whatever you design, whatever you do in your classroom, you have to do it in a way that preserves the productive struggle, the friction of learning, and if you don't, it's going to struggle. Frankly, I don't see any other way to, if you will, assign, if you want to call it homework, than a flipped classroom model. Because like I said yesterday, if you send home cognitively complex material, you just have to assume that they're going to have AI do it for them. And so I have to move the difficult things into the classroom so that I can protect their brains. I don't know if you're, young people, I don't know whether 17 or 18 or 22 and 23 or 30, want to take the route of the easiest route, right? The path of least resistance. And I want to not give them the path of least resistance. I want to give them the path of resistance. Not so much resistance they can't do it. There's a certain level where you need to help students. So I'm not saying just let them flail. I want them to thrive and succeed. So I encourage you, if you want more information about the MasteryFlip, this is the same QR code that we did yesterday. So if you've already signed up for that, you'll get the information from me. But I hope that was helpful, and you got to see in more detail of how the MasteryFlip model works, and that you can take it, contextualize it for your students, and make this work here in all of Brazil. Thank you very much. Now, I think we have time for some questions.